Oh, and here we go. It's started now. We have RoyalManiac versus Huangyudong. Huangyudong is white. To start this first game, we see King H3, King B3. Pretty standard approach, throwing the rook up, and then taking on F1, advancing the king. Pretty standard stuff here out of the opening, just blitzing it out. Haven't seen anything quite strange yet. But yeah, all standard stuff at this point. Queen here to hit the bishop. We've actually seen this line before. I believe rook f6 and bishop f6 are the two most common lines. For rook f6, usually queen takes, followed by rook to e7 or rook to b7. I don't think rook to b7 because the queen can take. If bishop f7, which I haven't seen played, I assume you just move the queen somewhere else. I'm not exactly sure where. Potentially just to c8 to hit the rook. Oh, instead rook takes b5 is played, which is odd. It gives the black king, the 5th rank. But I guess it's not terrible. You do get to move the rook over. Probably not there, but I'd assume you actually don't get to move the rook over, except to f6. And if rook f6, I assume just the queen to g8 to stop the king advance. But this bishop is hanging. You might want to play bishop g7 first. That's not a bad idea, taking. But now your bishop is pinned, and even though the no-check rule has the queen on the diagonal, the rook's in the way. And yes, the rook is hanging, so it's probably going to move, so it's fine. But that is something to worry about if you ever want to advance your king and keep your queen there. I assume he has a plan, maybe queen g4, to still provide coverage to his piece. Material's even, kings are even, so it's a pretty even position. The bishop is under attack for black though, so it looks like it'll be down material. But there probably is a way to keep it equalized here. I assume queen to f8 ideas aren't terrible to cover h6. So he is just ended up giving up the piece. If you come back to this position, there is the king move to keep the material on the board, but just an exchange of bishops. That is true. I missed that. That it still would be equal material with the bishops exchange. King advances, but because of the double attack onto g7, the rook can take on g7 and it'd be fine. Pinning the rook, so completely fine here. I'd assume something like queen to a3 to actually hit the rook, force the rook off, and then move to f8. But that's not played. Instead, a1 to g7, which is not a terrible idea, but I think that's completely drawn. Because yes, you move the rook to the b file, and then move the queen to the c file, as long as something like c3 or h1 isn't played. And yeah, they just decide to go for a draw in game 1, which is advantageous for Roy with the black pieces. Even though it's a theoretically drawn game, white does move first. Alright, so knight takes symmetry, then rook takes back the knight. Now an exchange of queens keeps the queens on the board. Rook g6, one of the most common lines in this. Well, but king b3, I thought rook b3 is theory. The idea here is that black does get the rook there and then gets to develop the queen first. But at the same time, white gets to advance their king first, and a runaway effect can happen here. Granted, this looks like a pretty easy situation, but there is this line here that is often played with the bishop to g2 before king to g5 that allows white to either pick up the bishop or have to move here and stop the development of the b file rook, or even worse, move the bishop to a3, which isn't terrible because it does cover here. But the thing is that you don't have your rook developed. It's really hard to develop your b file rook. Alright, so bishop a3, queen h6, and now rook b8. Queen h6 just stopped rook b6, and then rook b8 is just to develop the rook. I assume rook back to b6 here at some point. This move back here will trap the rook and guarantee that the rook is lost. But something like king a6 should be fine. Queen to b6 is an interesting idea. Never seen it played in this line before, but it does look kind of nice. I assume bishop back to b2 now to hit the queen. But this does fork. So yeah, not a terrible idea, just go king a6 immediately. We might see something like this, but the issue with that move is that it blocks the diagonal of the bishop, which could be a problem later. Roy is in trouble here, though. Rook to b7 looks pretty nice. This move is suggesting a draw. Are we going to see another draw here, or does black have an idea? The knight would take 3 moves to reach, while the bishop only takes 2 moves to reach for white. So I think that is drawn either way, because that would be 1, 2, 3 moves, and then 1, 2, 3 moves. That might actually be losing for black at that point. Interesting move here by white, trying to hang on to a win. I guess after king to a7, looking to take on b7. If not that immediately, there's rook to c7, but then you run into some queen to b8 issues to stop the king advance. Weird move just to reposition onto this diagonal, a waiting move. But I think the idea here is to bring the knight to h5 and g7. Maybe there's ideas of hitting the queen, but I feel like that just wins for black, because this knight will be able to race here. Granted, it's a major piece down. That might actually be drawn or even winning for white. It would take a bit for me to calculate that out. So just maneuvering the bishop to be not free after the no check rule, if it were to come here instead to go on this diagonal for the king to advance. Now this move is interestingly played. I assume taking here, and this honestly does not look good at all for black. Yes, rook b8 is played, but I do believe rook g8 just wins on the spot, which it's played, and white should be won here now. Because after something like this, there is no ability to take. And yes, we do see Roy up 1.5 to 0.5. We got 4 more games left to see. And Roy takes game 2. King h3 is played again by Huangyudong. I haven't looked at his prep, but this might be something that he plays usually, or it could be all prep, just to get draw lines as white. they're playing the same exact line as game 1. Except now rook gf6 is played instead of king h5. I assume the idea is to be ready to get to king g6. But there is a little bit of an issue here. After takes. Assume there's some shenanigans with the queen to d8 to hit the bishop. Even immediately now you can take the bishop. And after here, assume rook to e7 and then taking the rook after the king advances is completely fine. Obviously the knight on d1 is hanging, but no need to take that for white when they have the ability to advance their king. So rook takes f5 is played, but it forces the queen to move. Which if there is a queen move, I think it's fine. Not a bad idea. Probably planning on moving to e8. And if simply advances, I assume taking the bishop. Then moving here, playing rook g7. I don't like that. Because after moving here, you got a rook and a queen against a rook. Oop, my mouse is being buggy. Against a rook and a queen, but you're up 2 ranks and there is no look to advance. Decides to take the knight, which is a blunder, blundering the queen. Sure, the rook is pinned. I don't think this is winning though, because after queen takes, the rook is unpinned. You have 2 major pieces to come to the 7th and 8th ranks. So yep, black wins game 3. Series score 2.5 to 0.5 in Roy's favor. Wasn't a sweep, which wasn't expected to be a sweep, but looks like Rory's going away with the series. Starts off with the king g3, knight takes f2 standard line, but knight d4 is played on move 4 instead, which is technically a mistake. But this is all theory with the bishop a4. Bishop a4 ideas is something like bishop c6. Basically just the only square that you can move it to without the knight taking it. And if the knight takes it even here, it's bad for black. Although it is protected, I assume that there was some bishop b2 moves available. So the rook is under attack. I'm pretty sure that if you can advance, it's okay to sacrifice it. But moving your bishop here, I'm pretty sure just loses on the spot to takes. Oh, and rook b3 is played to trade the knight for the rook, and black resigns. So 3.5 to 0.5. Roy has won the series already. Now they're just playing for tiebreaker points. King h3 is played. Once again for Huang. There is a slight pause here. I wonder if there's some confusion, or if Roy was asking Huang if he just wanted to resign the rest of the series. But it looks like they might be playing into the same exact line, for which they aren't. Rook to g8 and bishop to g2 is played. Never seen this line before. I don't know if this is newer theory. But yeah, bishop g2 pinning. I've seen something along the lines of this, where this queen maneuver and saving the bishops. So very peculiar position. Can the king just come to g5? With g6 inbound, the knight will be protected at that point. But with something like rook to g4, maybe. Following. Oh, but the bishop's still there, so that's fishy. I guess maybe even sacrificing the bishop to g4, and then maybe queen h6. It's a lot of material to sacrifice for black if it doesn't pay out, but... Oh, for white if it doesn't pay out. But there is a potentials of that. Again, I haven't seen this line, so I don't know the theory in it. It looked like they had at least somewhat of an idea in the opening, though. So queen h6 is played immediately to preserve the bishop. I assume just to be wary of this bishop b2 move. Alright, but there should be queen d3 or queen e4 here to stop the advance. Maybe even just taking here with the knight. Usually putting the knight along this diagonal in endgames is lost, but I'm not sure in this situation. It looks very good for white. I do like white's position here. After queen d3, you obviously do have something like queen to g6. The issue is that there is king b5 and king a6 with the rook able to develop. And sure, you're advancing, but not pleasantly. Because I guarantee that it will be stopped to play king g7. Alright, queen is instead played to g7 instead of g6. I assume that's just to stop any rook b7 immediately. Doesn't really look like there's much for black to do. Here is a potential now, though, because the only advance is to h7. Okay, that's not a bad idea. Trying to hit the bishop after h6 and denying a queen move to like f7. The thing here is that I assume that after h6 that king to h6, knight takes f7, queen to g4 would be played, and that's fine. It forks the rooks, but obviously you don't want to take one. And now the rook is played to b7 to load up a rifle along the 7th rank. Bishop played back to hit the rook and almost forced this to be played. I assume that the rook to g1 is going to take to get involved in the game. At this point, I don't know the plans of Huang. That's a great move to allow king to g7 after takes. But there, yeah, what a clever move by Roy to find. Their speed of play is quite incredible. I mean, they are two of the top players. But I'm not sure if this is Juan. Doesn't this just give up the bishop? Oh, I see the plan here. Trying to come to g7 with the bishop instead. And you can't take because then here, well, Huang blundered the draw. If in that position, if you take with the king, you have the rook here on this rank, and even if the knight can stay, you can move over once more to place the rook in the position where you can go, at least at some point. Alright, bishop d4, symmetry here. 4-1 is the score of the series. If a draw happens in this game, it will be a equal series to the first series way, but what an interesting line, playing knight c3, knight takes c3, Rex Gambit, name of this move, named after what I used to play. And it's gone into a sideline that I'm not too familiar with this bishop d3. I know that it's very strong for white, and that there has to be a couple of very hard moves for black to find. Obviously, this is the king a3 line, which is the more defensive version, which is all about just taking material and then developing the rooks to the 7th and 8th ranks, and stopping the king from freely advancing. But what a treat for Roy to play this for me, knowing that I'm watching, and that streaming the game. Do appreciate it. So I'm not sure exactly what I would even play in this line. You don't have anything hanging by the looks of it. And a king advance seems fine, but there are always some moves to hit the queen. Soon, knight to f3 wasn't terrible in this position to fork the bishop and queen. But something like queen b5 would be playable, and the bishop would be saved by the no check rule. So both kings advance should what seems like the best squares for them. Obviously, white is playing a rook down, but they do have a bishop pair, very strong bishop pair at that. And if ever advances, there is just bishop takes here, and then there is no more advancing. And it's quite a terrible position for black to play at that point. But both players here had to be very careful. I assume that Roy wants to get his knight involved in the advancement here, as well as his rook. Rook to g7 looks playable, because rook takes g7 would allow king takes g7, and then some queen to this diagonal ideas. Decides to play here. The issue is that there is potentials of pinning it at some point. I don't see any immediately pinning moves. You could sacrifice the queen for the diagonal if the queen didn't hit this, so that's probably the idea here, just to make sure that there is no queen sacrifice for bishop pair. I don't know what ideas black has in this position. And that's a clever move. Protected by the no check rule, hits the rook. But yes, rook to a7 is a safe move. Both players are slowly getting lower on time, or you might see some time trouble here and even some blunders. Since this is pinned, I assume that this move is safe, with the idea of rook to g7 to follow, but the knight developing is still the safest way. You might even play to e5, g6, and then e7, just to allow a move here, so his rook can come to g8 freely. Allowing the queen to come off the board for the bishop with initiative. Instead, Roy takes the free knight. No advancements quite yet, but obviously there's a skewer here, and losing the rook on a7 is worth more than this currently useless queen on c5. Doubling up the defense onto the queen. Just leaving that skewer here. So yeah, knight takes to stop the advancement, bishop will take, and bishop will take. And then bishop will take. Currently there is no way to advance for black, but I assume that there is some possibilities, but now white has the material advantage. I did say this move immediately, but I think that it is actually losing. Just completely losing, actually. After takes, yep, there's drop back, and you have the bishop that can come. So white has won this last game. And the score 5-1 ends the series between Roy and Huang. Roy was the highest rated person in Group B of Division A, Huang was the second highest rated. So these are the two top dogs in Group B. And we just saw Roy win 5-1 in the series. I don't even know if Roy lost a rating. 2467 to start, 2468 to end. So Roy actually gained rating out of that. Good series though, overall. And I don't think anyone would be disappointed by that. It does look like I may have to fix my setup here to allow the black's clock to get into the view. Unless it's just that because of the variant ending, which I think is the case. A couple of very good games to see there. I will upload this to YouTube later. But yeah, a good series. That's all I have to say about that series. I think that we could have seen more opening variety from Huang. Even if he just stuck to King H3, then it would have been nice. Oh, and hi Roy. Didn't know you're the one watching. There was something, I think it was this last game, that I wanted to check out before. So let's go to here because it allows much easier view. But yes, right around here. After the bishop takes, king takes g7 is also drawn apparently, with some initiative for black. So knight b6. Okay, so that's just immediately drawing because the king gets you advance. Okay, makes sense. Before this though, apparently bishop takes g7 was losing. Oh, what a tough move to find. Knight to e7. And yeah, there really is nothing you can do for white here. Because after rook takes e6, knight comes here to allow the king to advance. And your rook is no longer in place to come to the 8th rank. I mean, that just looks completely won. And I assume that here is okay to take the queen, because of obviously mate and 1. But after something like bishop takes, I don't know if there is. It says king g6. I don't know if that holds on at all. It doesn't look like it will. Maybe some stalemate ideas, but because king g6 doesn't look like it will be cut off,